Good evening, everyone. How are you? Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Cameron McGill. I'm the co-director along with Debbie Lee of Washington State University's Visiting Writers Series. The series works to bring noted poets, agents, and writers of fiction and nonfiction to campus, virtually, of course, now, for readings, class visits, workshops, and collaborative exchanges with students. A quick thank you to our sponsors and collaborators for the 2020-21 season, WSU Vancouver, WSU Tri-Cities, the WSU Common Reading Program, ASWSU, Landescapes Literary Journal, and WSU Pullman's Department of English. Also, a quick thank you to Rob Baker and Brian Varner for their tech prowess this evening. A quick note to students, we will be posting a Common Read Qualtrics link at the end of Kelly's reading and Q&A, and that will be in the YouTube live chat function. After the reading, you may send questions and during the reading as well to the Q&A, to the chat, and we'll have those to ask after the reading. It is my pleasure to introduce Allison Pang, who is the editor-in-chief extraordinaire of Landescapes, which is WSU's undergraduate literary journal. And Allie is going to introduce Kelly Yang. Thank you, Allie.
Thank you, Cameron. So hi to everyone joining us today for Kelly Yang's reading. From myself and the Visiting Writers series, we really appreciate you guys for being here and continuing to support the arts despite a pandemic. We want to acknowledge that WSU's locations statewide are on the homelands of Native peoples. We express our deepest respect for and gratitude to these original caretakers of the region. We acknowledge their presence here since time immemorial and recognize their continuing connection to the land, to the water, and to their ancestors. In connection with WSU's common reading book, Trevor Noah's Born a Crime, Kelly Yang's writing also allows readers to witness the oppression and racism faced by immigrants who come to America. Under this theme, both writers succeed in introducing characters that hook the reader, a connection made perhaps not by the life they live, but by the struggles they face. These stories are not intended for one gender, one race, one sexuality, or one group of people. They are intended for everyone to be able to widen their views on the world. I think especially now in the times of the Black Lives Matter movement and future movements to come, it is important to take in the full story at all sides. As for Kelly's side of the story, she was 6 years old when she immigrated to America and spent her childhood growing up in Southern California. She went to college at 13 years old and law school at 17. She is a graduate from UC Berkeley, where she earned her degree in political science, and Harvard Law School. However, Kelly instead went on to pursue writing. For 13 years, she helped kids find and strengthen their voices in writing as a writing teacher. Kelly founded a writing and debating program for kids in Asia known as the Kelly Yang Project. Before she turned to her own fiction writing, Kelly worked as a columnist for the South China Morning Post. She has had her work published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Atlantic. Since going into fiction, Kelly has received lots of recognition for her writing and well earned the title of New York Times bestselling author. Kelly's middle grade debut novel, Front Desk, was awarded the 2019 Asian Pacific American Award for Children's Literature. The Parents' Choice Gold Medal is the 2019 Global Read Aloud, been named an Amazon Best Book of the Year, a School Library Journal Best Book of the Year, an NPR Best Book of the Year, and a Publisher's Weekly Best Book of the Year. In May, Kelly also published her first YA novel, Parachutes, as well as released Front Desk sequel 3 Keys last week Tuesday. And 3 Keys just got named a New York Times bestseller, so that's really awesome. I'm honored to be able to introduce Kelly, as the first time I was introduced to her was through BookCon Online's Raise Your Voice panel. So please join me in welcoming Kelly Yang.
Hi guys, it's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super, I'm just grateful for that introduction, grateful to be able to connect. And we're going to talk a lot about writing today. Writing was something that I loved as a kid because it was a way to process the world when it felt like the world was spinning out of control. And that certainly is the case today, I think. So hopefully we'll learn something about writing. So I'm going to start by reading a little bit from my debut novel, Front Desk. This was a book that I originally wrote for my son, Elliot, to teach him, well, to tell him a little bit about the way I grew up. And the way I grew up was in a motel as a young immigrant girl. Okay, chapter 1. My parents told me that America would be this amazing place where we could live in a house with a dog, do whatever we want, and eat hamburgers until we were red in the face. So far, the only part of that we've achieved is the hamburger part, but I was still holding out hope. And the hamburgers here are pretty good. The most incredible burger I've ever had was at the Houston Space Center last summer. We weren't planning on eating there. Everybody knows museum food is 50,000 times more expensive than outside food. But one whiff of the sizzling bacon as we passed by the cafe, and my knees wobbled. My parents must have heard the howls of my stomach, because the next thing I knew, my mother was rummaging through her purse for coins. We only had enough money for one hamburger, so we had to share. But boy, what a burger. It was a mile high with real bacon and mayonnaise and pickles. My mom likes to tease that I devoured the whole thing in one gulp, leaving the two of them only a couple of crumbs. I like to think I gave them more than that. The other thing that was great about the Space Center was the free air conditioning. We were living in our car that summer, which sounds like a lot of fun, but actually wasn't, because our car's AC was busted. So after the burger, my dad parked himself in front of the vent and stayed there the entire rest of the time. It was like he was trying to turn his fingers into popsicles. My mom and I bounced from exhibit to exhibit instead. I could barely keep up with her. She was an engineer back in China, so she loves math and rockets. She oohed and awed over this module and that module. I wish my cousin Shen could have been there. He loves rockets too. When we got to the photo booth, my mother's face lit up. The booth took a picture of you and made it look like you were a real astronaut in space. I went first. I put my head where the cardboard cutout was and smiled when the guy said cheese. When it was my mom's turn to take her photo, I thought it'd be funny to jump into her shot. The result was a picture of her in an astronaut suit hovering over Earth, and me standing right next to her in my flip-flops, doing bunny ears with my fingers. My mother's face crumbled when she saw the picture. She pleaded with the guy to let her take another one, but he said, no can do, one picture per person. For a second, I thought she was going to cry. We still have the photo. Every time I look at it, I wish I could go back in time. If I could do it all over again, I would not photobomb my mom's picture. I'd give her more of my burger too. Not the whole thing, but definitely some more bites. At the end of that summer, my dad got a job as an assistant fryer at a Chinese restaurant in California. That meant we didn't have to live in our car anymore, and we could move into a small one-bedroom apartment. It also meant my dad brought home fried rice from work every day. But sometimes he'd also bring back big old blisters all up and down his arms. He said they were just allergies, but I didn't think so. I think he got them from frying food all day long in the sizzling wok. My mom got a job at a restaurant in the front of the restaurant as a waitress. Everyone liked her, and she got great tips. She even managed to convince the boss to let me go with her to the restaurant after school, since there was nobody to look after me. My mother's boss was a wrinkly, white-haired Chinese man who reeked of garlic and didn't believe in wasting anything, not cooking oil, not toilet paper, not even free labor. You think you can handle waitressing, kid? He asked me. Yes, sir, I said. Excitement pulsated in my ear. My first job. I was determined not to let him down. There was just one problem. I was only 9 then and needed 2 hands just to hold one dish steady. The other waitresses managed 5 plates at a time. Some didn't even need hands. They could balance a plate on just their shoulder. When the dinner rush came, I too loaded up my carrying tray with 5 dishes. Big mistake. As my small back gave in to the mountainous weight, all my dishes came crashing down. Hot soup splashed onto the customers, and fried prawns went flying across the restaurant. I was fired on the spot, and so was my mother. No amount of begging or promising to do the dishes for the next gazillion years would change the owner's mind. The whole way home, I fought tears in my eyes. I thought of my 3 cousins back home. None of them had ever gotten fired before. Like me, they were only children as well. In China, every child is an only child, since the government decided all families are only allowed 1. Since none of us had siblings, we were our siblings. Leaving them was the hardest part about leaving China. I didn't want my mom to see me cry in the car, but eventually that night she heard me. She came into my room and sat on my bed. "Hey, it's okay," she said in Chinese, hugging me. "It's not your fault." She wiped a tear from my cheek. Through the thin walls, I could hear the sound of husbands and wives bickering and babies wailing from the neighboring apartments, each one as cramped as ours. "Mom," I asked her, "why did we come here? Why did we come to America?" I repeated. My mother looked away and didn't say anything for a long time. A plane flew overhead, and the picture frames on the wall shook. She looked into my eyes. "Because it's freer here," she finally said, which didn't make any sense. Nothing was free in America. Everything was so expensive. "But Mom," "one day you'll understand," she said, kissing the top of my head. "Now go to sleep." I drifted to sleep, thinking about my cousins and missing them and hoping they were missing me back. So that's from Front Desk, which was my debut novel. And now I'm going to read from 3 Keys, which is the sequel to Front Desk. So it might give a little bit away, but hopefully you'll still read Front Desk. Chapter 1. A very wise person once told me that there are 2 roller coasters in America, one for the poor and one for the rich. I've only been on one of those roller coasters, and I thought I was never going to get off. But as I watched my best friend Lupe decorate the Cala Vista Motel pool with silver and gold lights, a smile stretched across my face. The lights were the kind you put up in your house at Christmas. Even though it was the middle of August and the summer sun beat down on us, it sure felt like Christmas. We were owners now. We had bought the motel from Mr. Yao, and we were finally going to run it our way. A little to the left, Mrs. T, one of the Weekleys, called, pointing to the barbecue at the pool sign. She and the other Weekleys, Hank, Mrs. Q, Fred, and Billy Bob, were also helping set up. They were our regular customers at the motel, but they were so much more. They were family. Hank smiled at the sign. The barbecue was his idea. It was part of his friendlier and warmer rebranding of the Cala Vista, and it was going to be delicious. We were having Hank's tangy, sweet baby back ribs, Fred's corn on the cob, and my mother's fried rice. Hank adjusted the sign, and we all stood back to admire it. Lupe's dad, Jose, gave a holler and a thumbs up from the roof. I waved back at Jose. Ever since we took over the motel, he'd been working almost exclusively at the Cala Vista, which meant I've gotten to hang out with my friend Lupe all summer. My mom rushed out from the manager's quarters with a large cooler full of ice, with my dad trailing after her. "Don't take that out so early," my dad cautioned. "The ice is going to melt." My mom placed the cooler beside the table with the napkins and drinks. "Then I'll just run out and get some more," she said. You'd think that now that we were making more money, my parents would stop bickering. But every morning, my dad still pours the cooking oil he saved from the previous night's dinner into the breakfast pan, saying, "Don't waste," in Chinese. And he still pulls a square from the toilet paper roll to wipe his nose instead of using a Kleenex. It's like he doesn't believe any of this is real, that if he doesn't save every penny, it'll all disappear. I walked over to the plastic pool chairs where my dad sat and bent down next to him. "We're on the good roller coaster now, Dad," I told him. "Things are going to be different. You'll see." Okay, I'm going to stop reading from 3 Keys because there's not like a natural place to stop after that. But I will read now from Parachutes, which is my YA. So parachutes, the term, it comes from, I don't know who invented it, but it basically means international students from Asia who come over to study and live on their own in the US. And often they come for university, but they can also come for high school. And so this book is about the kids who come over on their own from China for high school. And the immigrants who are coming over now, it's very different from before during the 90s when Mia Tang came over in Front Desk. As you'll see from the book, they have a lot more money. They are, no longer so cash strapped, but they face similar issues of discrimination and finding, their place and finding a good support network here in the US. So chapter 1, and this is told from Claire's perspective. In Parachutes, there are 2 girls, Claire and Danny, and so they're alternating POV chapters. Chapter 1, Claire, Shanghai, China. I lie in bed listening for the shuffle of my father's slippers. It's 7:30 a.m. My father, if he were home, would be in the kitchen, sitting down to his breakfast. 3 egg whites scrambled with oatmeal, doctor's orders, which he would remark to Tressie, our maid, were either overcooked or undercooked, just so he could get up and go rummaging around the kitchen for one of the taro buns he's not supposed to eat, but that my mother secretly buys for him anyway. She buys them for him because she hopes the sweet gooey taro would somehow lure him away from his mistress, providing the kind of warmth and stickiness that will make him want to come home. Except that his mistress also knows to buy him taro buns. I've never met her, but the other day she tried to add me on WeChat. I stared at her picture for almost an hour, trying to decide if she was prettier than my mom. She looked about 25, half my father's age, with long flowing hair, styled curly and tinted red at the tips. Her hand was running casually through her hair, pulling her shirt up just enough to reveal the milky white of her skin. The whole thing looked so effortless and staged at the same time, the kind of shot I try to take, but can never get right. I deleted the friend request and didn't tell my mom about it, though maybe I should have. It was bold of her to reach out to me. There have been others, I'm sure, but none of them dared make contact. I closed my eyes, sinking back into my bed, trying not to think about what that means, or where my dad is, for that matter. The softness of my mom's hand on my cheek wakes me up hours later. My mom's sitting on my bed staring at me like a creep. Mom, ew, what are you doing? I squirm away from the light pouring in from the window, burying my face in the sheets. It's nearly noon, she says in Mandarin. She's wearing big Chanel sunglasses. You okay? I ask her, peering at her sunglasses. She nods. Oh yeah, just allergies, probably from the pollution, she lies. I glance out the window. The Shanghai sky, normally gross and gray, looks peacefully white today, like those might actually be clouds we're seeing. Her shades slide down an inch, and when I turn to look at her, I catch a glimpse of her red, swollen eyes underneath. Is it Dad? I ask gently. She pushes her sunglasses up firmly like a shield. Of course not. He's just working, she says. I don't know who she's lying to, me or herself. She reaches out a hand. Hey, let's go out for dinner tonight, she says, her face brightening. I hesitate. I have so much homework, but her eyes say, I need this. Sure, Mom. It takes me 6 hours to slog through the homework my teachers assign me. I'm in 11th grade at a local school in Shanghai, which means every day I'm a slave to my taskmaster. First math, then science, then English, and then Chinese, my weakest subject, despite the latest fancy tutor my mom got me. Her name is Ms. Chen, but I call her Sticky Fingers for the way she licks her fingers after polishing off the fruit that Tressie brings us when I'm being tutored. When she's not busy eating fruit, she's barking at me what to write for my essay so I'll get a high mark, literally word for word, as though I'm not capable of producing my own thoughts. I always throw away the paper after she leaves. My friends and I sometimes watch American movies about teenagers hatching plots and going to crazy places. And we're like, when do they have time to do this? In China, every second of my day is usually decided by someone else. When the last of my assignments is finally done, I walk upstairs to my mom's room. I can hear Snowy's bell, our poodle. If Snowy's in there, it means my mom's probably forgotten about dinner. She never lets Snowy in my room when she's getting dressed for fear of Snowy chewing up her shoes. I'm about to turn when the door swings open. My mom's in her satin robe, her hair's up in a towel, and she's holding a glass of chilled rosé. Adele plays in the background. Go put on something nice, she tells me. We're going to M. M on the Bund is one of my mom's favorite restaurants, right on the river, a tourist attraction, but in a good way. My mom used to take me there when I was little, usually after I just won a swim meet. Now she takes me only when she's all out of girlfriends. She usually goes with Auntie Maggie and Auntie Pearl, women who share her love of complaining and laser skin treatments. We sit at the corner table overlooking the balcony. My mom's in a wool gray dress, chic but not loud, thank God, unlike some of her other clothes. I'm in black pants and a white shirt. Unlike my mom, who loves her dresses colorful and tight, I opt for understated and functional. Mom sips champagne while making small talk with the waiter. She's a regular, and he kisses up to her so shamelessly, I have to look away. She orders for us while I gaze out the window at the boats going up and down the Bund, tourists taking pictures, the Oriental Pearl Tower. There's a roller coaster inside. When I was little, I used to go on it with my dad. I smile at the memory. The waiter finally leaves us alone. Did you know your father and I met here? She asks. She points to the where the hostess is, in her pencil thin stilettos, balancing delicately behind a white marble table, right over there. She told me the story 1,000 times. She was a college student at Fudan, working as a hostess that summer. He was an executive with a considerable expense account. It was love at first sight and a trip to Cartier shortly after. I was just 19, my mom reminds me. Not much older than you, so young. Her cheeks flush with nostalgia, and I settle in for a trip down memory lane. I try to take a sip of her champagne, but she moves the flute out of reach. I protest, oh, come on. I was so beautiful then, she continues, ignoring me. You're still beautiful, I remind her. I can't tell you how many of my classmates, the guys especially, have commented on my mom's appearance. Your mom's gorgeous, they usually say, followed by, you sure she's your mom? Ha ha ha. It used to bother me that she looked so much younger than all the other moms. I guess that's what happens when you get started at 20. She used to joke that we were both still kids. She'd ask me, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I'd ask her back, what do you want to do when you grow up? And she'd laugh and laugh. I don't know when she stopped laughing. She shakes her head at the champagne, pursing her lips. I'm getting old, she sighs. She grows quiet, eyes welling up. I hope that's not what she's blaming Dad's infidelity on. My phone dings. It's a WeChat voice message from my boyfriend, Teddy. He's a year older than me and studying hard for his Gaokao. The Chinese college entrance exams are so intense that girls take birth control pills to avoid getting their period during that week, and construction work is halted, traffic diverted near the examination halls so as to not disturb the students. So far, though, he still has time to mess around. I tap play on the app. I try to tap out of the app, but my finger accidentally presses play. Hey, babe, just thinking about the other day in the back of the library. It was so... I shut off the message, and for the next 2 minutes, sit there with my face melting off my skull. My mom is silent. She knows about me and Teddy, but she still thinks of high school dating as I'll walk you to class, you walk me to class, that type of thing. Have you and Teddy? She fumbles to get the word out. No, I exclaim, of course not. My mom's eyes scan me like a human lie detector. I remind myself I have nothing to hide. We haven't done anything more than make out, though lately he's been asking me for pics. He swears he won't show them to anyone else. I haven't indulged him, but I haven't flat out said no either. Promise me you'll save yourself for someone special, my mom says. A Fortune 500 CEO, perhaps. Someone better. Better than me or better than Teddy? Teddy's a nice guy, I say. A nice guy? Mom laughs, waving her champagne flute in the air. You think that's what's going to pay for all of this? A nice guy? No, I'm going to pay for all this, I snap. I have a brain, remember? She chooses her words carefully. So use it to get into a good school. Trust me, it'll be a lot harder to meet a good husband once you're out of school. I was lucky to have met your father when I did. I raise an eyebrow at her. I'm just trying to watch out for you, she says, her voice softening. She reaches out a hand, and my anger thaws. I look over at my mom sitting there, so lonely, sneaking glances at her phone, pretending to be smoothing out her napkin when we both know she's checking to see if he's called. He hasn't. Gently, my mother lifts her champagne flute and sets it down in front of me, a peace offering. I take a sip. Yeah, that's it for the reading portion. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. They're pretty different in terms of my books, but I'm really excited to take any questions you guys might have now.
So I guess I can start it. These are more like questions that I'm just curious about. Maybe others also have similar questions, but what was it like switching between writing a middle grade and then switching to like YA? Is it something you always wanted to do or something you were trying?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, it was hard. I think when you have a book that is really popular, like Front Desk is a very popular book, it's always a risk. It's always a challenge and a risk. And I definitely felt like there was pressure for me to stay in middle grade. People loved my middle grade, and I love middle grade. I mean, I really genuinely do. But I really wanted to tell the story. To me, the story is really personal. It has to do with sexual assault, something I'd gone through as a student. It was really, really important for me to tell that story and to tell it in this way with these two girls. To me, like Parachutes is a love story between these two girls and what can happen when they tear down that wall and they both sort of tell each other what happened. So that was just such a overwhelming feeling to write the story that I just kind of ignored all the voices saying, no, you should stay in middle grade. And, you know, it was a risk. It really was. I wasn't sure how it was going to be received. This is a critically acclaimed book. It's gotten like so many starred reviews and people love it. But I, at the time, had no idea. And YA is really hard to write. And also YA with two voices is really, really hard. Anything with like alternating POV is just so difficult because when you're editing a book, that means like you're editing like, you know, 4 books or 8 books at the same time. So it's because the two narratives are interweaving. So I don't know. In hindsight, I'm really glad I did it, but it was a lot.
Yeah, I really liked the way you moved between the two characters. I think you did it really well, honestly, to the point where I think if others read it, after a while, you just kind of know who's talking at that point, I think.
That's great. That's always the objective.
Yeah, Kelly, we have lots of questions from our
Oh, great.
audience. Yeah, so from Elena Carroll, what parts of your life match what happens in Front Desk?
I always say that Front Desk is inspired by my childhood. It's probably about 60% real and 40% fiction, I would say. But it's hard to pinpoint because sometimes like things will happen and then they become like a seed and, you know, it'll grow into something else. So I'm trying to think a good example is probably like, you know, we did go to the, I think we did go to the museum. We did go and, you know, eat the hamburger. And I think I did not share with my parents, which is something that they always remind me. And so I just took like that one scene and it developed into this whole theme of like, oh, you know, I'm not good enough. Like my parents always expect me to be this way, but I'm never this way. I'm this whole other way. And everything I do is like, I'm never going to match up to the image that they have. And the fact that they came here and they sacrificed so much for me. So I'm living with this immigrant guilt. And how do I navigate like that along with just being a kid and trying to explore like my own dreams. So it's like something might happen and it's really just a seed, but it can grow into like, who knows, like something totally different. So it's really hard to say what was real and what was not. Even the scenes that were real were changed, you know, and had gone through so many iterations that, you know, you could kind of tell. It's like the way I describe it is like, you know how people do those like cartoon images of people, like if you were to draw me like a cartoon, And then if I say to you, like, that's me, you'll be like, oh yeah, I could see that. That's how I think, that's what I think of like contemporary fiction, where it's based on the author's life. It's like, yeah, I could see that was your life, but then so much has changed that if you didn't tell me that, I also wouldn't have no idea.
That's great. Wow, we're getting so many questions. Thank you so much to our viewers. This is really nice. I'm going to combine a couple of questions. One is, what sorts of things do you worry about in representing immigrant and survivor stories, which you sort of touched on in the last answer. But also, to what extent, if any, do you imagine your audience as Asian American, and do you consciously try to avoid stereotypes?
I would say that I try to write really believable characters. I try to write really nuanced stories, and very round characters. So my characters are always flawed. There's never a perfect, Mia Tang can be like extremely impulsive and, cranky or whatever. And Claire certainly has her issues, and so does Danny. But I try to do it in a way that really feels real. And that's how you avoid stereotyping people. Stereotyping people, I think, is making stock characters where it's just like they're really one-dimensional. And if you do a good job of rounding out your character and creating a really solid backstory and like understanding their motivations, and it takes time. Like, frankly, like I'm getting better at writing the front desk books, because I've now been with these characters for so many years. It takes time to really get to know your characters. Just like it takes time to get to know like real people, like your friends, So that's one way. And then in terms of representation, that's something that is so important to me. And especially as an Asian American creator, there's such a responsibility, because there aren't that many stories about us. And so we cannot afford to get it wrong. Like, if we get it wrong, it'll set our people back like 10 years, So there's a huge responsibility that comes with being a author of color and writing about characters of color. So I think that's just something that we like have to be very conscious about. And it takes multiple drafts. It takes working with sensitivity readers. It takes a really sharp editor. It takes all of that. And sometimes, my editors will point out things that like I didn't even think about. And that process of, taking a manuscript and putting it through all these different hurdles is really important, actually. And we complain about it, but it actually is really important.
Kind of going off of that, what do you think, what's like your opinion on people that want to write a story about a culture that isn't theirs? Is there a certain amount of like research? Like, what would you tell those people that do want to tell a story about another culture?
I think it depends. Like, for example, I write front desk, and it's a very diverse group of characters. Mia's best friend is Mexican American. One of the weeklies is African American. So there's a huge diversity in terms of our cast, but the main character is Chinese American. I know that character very intimately because she is very much based on my own like childhood. And I would say that for an author to write another culture, it really depends on the circumstances. First, you have to ask yourself, why do you have to do that? If there's like a compelling reason and you're the best person to tell that story, we really need to hear it, because otherwise, if there's no good reason, then you're potentially just taking an opportunity away from someone else to do it better, to do it better than you, right? So why would you? That doesn't serve the story. It doesn't serve yourself. That said, there are also cultures where they have already had millions of stories told about them, right? So like Celeste Ng can write a story about white people because there are already like millions of stories about white people. So even if the representation is different or off or even whatever, and she does a fantastic job. So I love Celeste, but that's an example of like, it's not the end of the world if we get it a little bit wrong if you're talking about a dominant culture, right? But if it's the reverse, it's like a white author writing about a Chinese American, it's a little different because we haven't had a million stories told about us. And so if someone gets a big part of our narrative wrong, that could really hurt us, right? So I think you have to think about that way. I think the big question is, why are we doing it? You know, is there any way we can do it in a way that's more authentic? Like, you don't necessarily need your protagonist to be of a different ethnicity if that ethnicity is not central to your story, right? If you want to explore like loss or hardship or like, I don't know, whatever, romance, you don't have to necessarily do that with someone who you don't know anything about, right? So I guess, does that answer your question?
Thanks. That was great, Kelly. So wow, as an adult, as a young adult literature author, how do you feel about censorship? Do you think it's necessary? Why or why not?
Like in what context?
That's the question. So I mean, I would interpret it as, you know, are there topics that you don't explore because of your audience is a younger audience?
I mean, for example, there's sex in parachutes, there's sexual assault in parachutes, but it's not gratuitous, you know? So I would say that if you are writing for YA or children, I wouldn't use the word censorship, but I would definitely want to make sure that what you're writing is serving the story and is keeping in mind the audience age group, right? There's just no need to be writing gratuitous violence or gratuitous sex when you're trying to write for children. But I also think that it's really important for kids to read books that some people might consider taboo or whatever, right? Like, there definitely, I'm sure, people who might think that like reading about sexual assault is not appropriate or whatever. And I think that is too bad. I think that is like not a great way of thinking, because I think kids are going to be thinking about sex. They're going to be researching it on the internet. They're going to be talking about it with their friends, and things like consent. Like, those are conversations we need to be having with our kids earlier on, so that they don't get into situations where their body's been violated, where they're like feeling hopeless and they are facing something horrible like that. So I really encourage parents and kids to, you know, allow themselves to read widely. At the same time, I do think that authors, we have a responsibility. We can't be gratuitous. And we do have to understand that kids are innocent, and we want to make sure that, you know, we're not just blasting them with unnecessary sex scenes or whatever.
Allie, do you have another question? Or do you want me to go for it?
I can go. Do you have any plans to write another YA novel? I know you said that it is harder to write YA and you do like middle grade more, but do you think that you'd write another one?
Yes, definitely. I want to write another YA. I think I'm under contract to write another YA, so I have to write another YA. I've just been, you know, it's been hard because of the pandemic. I feel like it's been a lot harder to be really productive than I normally am. And I don't know, I've just been really enjoying middle grade right now, but I definitely will go back to YA.
Do you have any like advice for people that want to write YA versus people that want to write more middle grade?
I think the middle grade voice is really tough, and it really has to do with spending time accessing your inner 10-year-old, which is really hard. It's really, really hard. For me, it's a little bit easier because I was a teacher for 15 years. I also have 3 kids, one of whom is 10. So it's a little bit easier, but even then it's really, really hard. I think that YA is, I think YA has gotten to be a really tough industry. I think it's pretty crowded right now. And so, but that said, a great idea and a great voice will always make you break So I think that the best thing to do with YA is to read widely, like read all the YA that's coming out recently so that you understand the voice. It's YA is, there's a very particular YA voice. It's sort of like an angsty teenage thing. It's really cool. It's so great. Especially if you love like watching a lot of the, you know, the cool shows on TV. But I think it takes some time. For me anyway, it took a little bit of time to access that voice. And for some reason, the middle grade voice just came more naturally to me. So but they're both doable. I guess what I'm trying to say is they're both doable. You just need to spend the time immersing yourself into either world.
Wow, what a great answer. I was thinking the same thing as I was listening to you, the way you harnessed that 10-year-old and then jumped to the voice of the in Parachutes, which is much more knowing and
and that was the hard thing. Like these two books, they came out right around the same time, right? This came out in May and this came out in last week. So these two were on the same editorial trajectory, which meant I was constantly going back and forth and back and forth. And there would be times where I'd write a draft and then my editor would be like, this sounds too much like Nia Tang. And I'm like, oh, darn it, because I just edited that. And then I'd have to take a week. I'd be like, Ben, I can't get this back to you. I need to take a week, wash the Nia Tang off me so I can get back to Parachutes.
That's a great transition because someone has a Ross, where did it go? Ross Swains has a great question about, can you explain why it is hard to write from like in Parachutes to from multiple POVs, which for those of you watching, POV is point of view. So two different characters. Yeah. I would love to hear that answer too.
Okay, so the reason why it's hard is because you have to construct two stories and you have to line up all the points where they meet so that they are balanced. Like, have you ever read a book where there's two characters, one of whom is going through some really exciting stuff and the other person is not going through anything exciting at all? And as the reader, what do? You usually want to skip the person who's like not so exciting to get to find out what happens next to the other person, right? And that's because it's not balanced. It's because one thing is way too exciting and the other one is just not going anywhere, right? And so that is not an effective book because you're going to lose like half your readers, number one. The other half is just going to skip half your book, which is also bad. So if you want to do it right, you have to take the two narratives. They have to be balanced in terms of the weight, and you have to find all the intersecting points and make sure that they line up perfectly. The trouble with that is when you're editing, often when you're editing, you have to rewrite giant chunks of your manuscript. So imagine you're editing. So imagine you line everything up and it's all perfect, but then now you have to completely rewrite one person. So now your whole like alignment is out of order, and you're going to have to go back and probably rewrite the other person just to rebalance it. And that usually happens like 3 to 4 times during a manuscript. So yeah, I honestly, like, it was one of those books that like nearly killed me really hard. But it's really amazing what you can learn if you can do it. You grow as a writer so much, but I would not recommend it for your first time.
Allie, do you have another question, or should we keep going with the some great questions? Someone asked, why did you choose to do a 2-perspective story? I think you answered that. You just really grew as a writer, and yeah.
And also I wanted to address sexual misconduct, sexual assault from 2 girls' POV, because one of the girls, Claire, has a lot of money, so she's coming from a lot of privilege, and the other girl is a scholarship student. She's like very poor. Her parent, her mom doesn't have a lot of money, and something like this affects you differently depending on your resources, right? Like when something horrible happens, it affects us differently. At the same time, it doesn't really affect us differently because both girls have to live in it, and it sucks. Like, no amount of money is going to make you have a great sexual assault. That's just not possible, right? So I wanted to show that. I wanted people to really feel that, like that there are differences, but at the same time, there's really no difference. But both girls have to just suffer through this trauma. And it's actually like I'm making this book sound depressing, but it's really not. It's a pretty, what I also really wanted to do was tell the love story of the two girls. I mean, they're not like sexual partners or anything, but they become like sisters, the sisterhood and the survivorship. And that's what's really beautiful and like groundbreaking about Parachutes is taking this horrible experience that I had and making something really beautiful out of it, but also showing people like, look, you know, this thing is really horrible. Many of us had to go through it, but we can also come together and, you know, be empowered simply by using 2 words, me too.
That's a really beautiful answer. Thank you. I remember when Allie read your book, she like wrote me and she goes, this book, she sent me a cover. She sent me a picture attached to the cover. She loved it. So yeah, that's
So good. I love it so much.
And actually, I wanted to say, thank you so much. But, you know, I had multiple offers on this book where the editors wanted me to get rid of one of the girls, you know, so we had many offers, and some of the offers were like, I want you to only focus on Claire, or I want you to focus only on Danny. And in the end, I went with the one editor that allowed me to keep both girls, because that was just so important to me.
Yeah, I think that's so important, especially since I'm Chinese and Filipino. It was so cool because I've never seen both of those ethnicities like in the same book before.
Yeah.
At least not where they're main protagonists. That was awesome.
That's so cool.
So here's a good question. And this is from Lynn Cooper. Do you fall in love with your characters, and how do you deal with the emotional toll of making bad things happen to them?
Oh, great question. You know, you gotta kill your darlings sometimes. You've gotta hurt them. You don't have to kill them, but I think I do fall in love with the characters, but what I have a harder time with, not so much, you know, writing scenes where they get hurt, but I have a harder time letting go sometimes. And sometimes it's interesting because when you're done with the manuscript and you turn it in, you have to almost go through this mourning process because it's no longer your baby. You know, now it belongs to your agent, your editor, and soon it'll belong to everyone in the world. So there is a mourning process that happens, and sometimes I've been known to sit on manuscripts and just not turn them in for as long as I can, just hang on to them so I have a little bit more time with my baby, to really like just snuggle her and like love the thing and love what I've created. In terms of hurting the character, I never think of it as that, because I think of it as more like, I need them to grow emotionally. And the only way you can grow emotionally is to confront your fears, is to go through crap, right? Like that's like the only way to grow emotionally. And so because I want my characters to get there emotionally, to go to you know, complete their arc, I have to hurt them because there's no other way to complete their arc. So I think of it as helping them, like, you know, and that's always what I thought ever since I was little. It's just, you know, if you know, watch like Disney movies, like horrible things happen to all these characters in Disney movies. Like every Disney movie is just like, if you really look at it, it's like, oh my God, like what? And the father is like killed by the uncle, oh my God, right? But really it's so important because otherwise your character will never realize that growth.
Yeah, that's yeah, and you're even getting Shakespearean here too. I heard, you know, tones of Hamlet. I had a couple of writing questions. Someone, Anne Claire, wants to know, when writing, do you show your work to others for input, or do you wait till the end? And what's your writing process? And then another viewer wanted to know how you got your publisher for your first book.
Okay, so the first question, do I show my work? I never show my work to anyone until it's done and until I'm really happy with it. And I often will edit it and rewrite it several times before I show it to the first person I always show my work to is my agent. And I usually don't show anything to her until there's really nothing else I can do by myself to make it better. And I'll tell you why. I think it is so important that you choose very carefully who you show your work to, because there's nothing worse than someone who's not really a good editor giving their 2 cents. And so you really have to be careful who you show your work to. And I would never rush to show my work to someone. I know as writers it's lonely and we want feedback. We really want feedback. We want the reaction, but you have to, part of being a writer, I think, is the test of patience, of can you get through that? Can you like, survive not showing your work to someone for a long period of time, resist the temptation to get that quick affirmation, and really put in the work to make it better by yourself before finally choosing someone very carefully, because that person is going to be your most ideal reader. And what that means is someone who's going to be thoughtful, someone who's going to care, someone who's going to put in the sensitivity and be, be kind, be kind with your work. Because that's the other thing, is like often we have people who like just are so blunt and they don't understand the vulnerability it takes as a writer. It's like we're so vulnerable when we put our thoughts onto the page. You can't have a super harsh critic. It's just, that'll kill you, so you have to be really careful who you show your work to, and best to resist this and try to prolong it until you absolutely have to show it to someone. And obviously you do absolutely have to show it to someone. And how I got my publisher was I just cold queried agents, and it's really easy to do. You just look up literary agents of your favorite authors, and then you can go to their website and they'll usually have querying instructions, and then just send them an email and say, like, it has to be a finished manuscript, I believe. And then you send them an email, and then they'll get back to you and they'll say, I really want to read the rest of this, or I want to read the first 50 pages or whatever. And then if they really like it enough, they'll offer you representation. And that's how I got my agent.
Okay, one more question. You got lots of love in the comments, Kelly. So I will shut the comments down when the reading is over, just because we don't want to compromise anybody's privacy. But I will send Kelly all the love and comments that you guys gave her. I'll get this last question in. How do you get an idea for a new book?
It's a great question. I think what I get is a bunch of little random thoughts that usually won't go away. So I have a lot of thoughts throughout the day. Like every day I'm like, oh, that would be a good book. Oh, that would be a good book. Oh, that would be a good book. Most of these thoughts disappear after a day. Like I'll eat dinner, I'll forget about it. I'll like go, walk the dog, I'll forget about it. But the ones that linger and stay with you, those have to become a book, because they will haunt you. They will literally not ever leave you alone. So it's actually not hard to get an idea, because the idea kind of chooses me and won't let go. But so little things, like, for example, like if you pay attention to what makes you mad, like the next time you get really mad, just ask yourself, like, why am I so mad? Like, why am I so mad? I don't understand. I just feel really pissed off for some reason. And you'll usually be able to sift through a bunch of superficial reasons and coming to some sort of emotional truth, right? Something that is triggering this, you feel like you're not being heard, or something's going on, some relationship is not working. And those are gold. Those are like the big themes that go into a book. And so if you just like play detective with yourself you probably have like a million book ideas in you. You don't even realize it. But it's just what you do as a writer. You're just always thinking about your feelings. Just, I was always like the sensitive kid growing up, and my teachers were always like, "Oh my God, you're so sensitive." And then I realized like this could work in my favor. Like it's okay to be sensitive, you know. You just have to mind that and find out why.
Awesome. Okay. So thank you, Kelly, for being a part of this event. It was really awesome hearing everything that you had to say, and I'm sure everyone in the chat is just sending so much love. Is there do you have social media? Is there anywhere that people can follow you?
Absolutely. You guys can find me on Twitter at Kelly Yang HK, and then on Instagram, Kelly Yang HK. You can go to my website, kellyyang.com. But let me know if you read, especially when you read Parachutes, let me know what you think. This was probably the closest to your guys' age group. But yeah, I really wish you guys the best of luck. Keep writing. We need your stories. This is a great time to be writing. I know it's like depressing as hell out there, but if you can somehow find the art in all of this, it's beautiful. It's really beautiful, and we really need it.
Yeah. And I have another announcement for the Visiting Writer Series. So we will be having Ross Gay here on Thursday, October 15th at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So please tune in for that too. But yeah, I think that's all we have here. DJ, do you have anything else?
Yeah, and you can access Ross Gay's link. It's another YouTube Live link. It'll run very similar to this on our website, which is just type in VWS WSU and our site will come up.
Cool.
So thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It was an honor. Bye.